with the streaming companies, because there's so many of them now, it's just there's more opportunities for young filmmakers. As long as the story has a beginning, a middle, and an end that makes sense and that just keeps your interest. And you know, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the ugly can get really ugly. My name is Lars Bjorck, and right now I'm an independent producer. I live in Southeast Asia. I live in Vietnam. And lately I've been developing projects to film in Southeast Asia. But I also have a company in Bogota, Colombia that does production services with another partner of mine. And the reason for that is my background is in distribution. And I used to work with Colombians and Latin Americans and Europeans. And I had a company with my father for many years, Leonard Bjorck, who had a company called Bjorck Films. And we represented foreign distributors and acquired movies on their behalf. So in the very early days, my dad's first gig was actually helping Apocalypse Now out of trouble. He received a call from a gentleman called Tom Sternberg, who said, our set was destroyed in the Philippines, and we need to pre-sell the movie. And my dad said, what's that? And so he went out and he pre-sold the distribution rights for Apocalypse Now in Latin America and in Scandinavia, thereby helping Francis Ford Coppola out a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was the beginning of Bjorck Films and also the beginning of my career. I joined my father, working with him for 15 years, basically representing Shochiku in Japan, Village Roadshow in Australia, Latin American distributors, and we had relationships with Saul Zenz in the early days, with Amadeus and all those wonderful movies that he made, and that was the beginning. There was this project at the time, The Lord of the Rings. And we were working with Shochiku in Japan. And the Japanese said to me, no, Lord of the Rings, we don't know that. We haven't read the book. We really don't understand that. So then I suggested that they go see New Line, Rolf Mitweg, and they see a promo reel, a 15-minute promo reel that was shot to promote the whole concept. And after they saw it, they said, okay, we like what we see. I think we'll buy it. And they bought it for Japan. And I started dabbling in production a little bit. And so one of the first movies that I became involved with was Havoc, which I found the money for, and which Media 8 funded and distributed internationally, and New Line picked it up domestically. Well, I find that it's very exciting. There's a lot of new opportunities because of all the new streaming players. Netflix, of course, has made a huge dent everywhere and has gotten a lot of distributors, running and competing because video is more or less dead, still a little bit, but not much. So the business is really now either theatrical or television. And with the streaming companies, because there's so many of them now, it's just there's more opportunities for young filmmakers, to write new content, to make more episodic series, features, and even though it's become maybe more difficult because you still need to have cast, and that's the most important element always. You can have the best script and no cast and be stuck with it, So it's very important to have those relationships with agents, with managers, with other producers, form alliances that make sense for you to move forward, Good stories is the first thing I look for. A story that really moves you, either the plot or the characters. But I find that, I'm pretty open to any genre, as long as the story has a beginning, a middle, and an end that makes sense and that just keeps your interest. That's the most important thing. I mean, there's so many tax incentive areas now in the world, and there's so many opportunities that you can, literally, buy a book on them and choose the location that you want to do it on. And it all depends on the story. Where are you going to set your story? Is it a city? Is it an urban? Is it a country? Is it a desert? And then you choose depending on where your benefits are. I've chosen for myself, because I speak Spanish and I grew up in Latin America. I was born in Peru, so my first language was Spanish. I have partners in Colombia, and because Colombia has tax incentives that are very attractive today, up to 40%, and labor is quite inexpensive, and the locations are quite varied, I find that Colombia has become very good for me. But you can find places in the United States that offer very attractive tax deals. Canada, of course. Europe has always been good at co-productions and incentives there. But for me, it's now basically Colombia for the tax purposes and the language and the locations, and Southeast Asia for the type of product that I'm involved with right now. So there's a family film that we're looking at right now. And we're looking at doing it in Vietnam because it's a very family-oriented country, and they're looking to do family movies. And I know that family movies do very well in other parts of the world. But if you just do a Vietnamese family movie, it's not going to translate very well because of the culture. But if you broaden it and maybe have a relationship, whereas the Vietnamese, leading character has a relationship with a Western person, and whether it's in the States or whether it's in Europe or anywhere else, and it makes sense, it's an organic story, then all of a sudden you have the potential to find money from both sides. And so that's what we're finding in Vietnam. There's an action film that I'm looking at doing with an actor who's worked in Vietnam, a Western actor, but he's very comfortable with Vietnamese culture. And so he's worked in Vietnam before, and he knows the Vietnamese producers and the atmosphere and the culture. So he's open to doing a similar thing, where you take a genre, a martial arts genre that works very well in Southeast Asia, but you add a Western side to it, so that it can broaden it, work anywhere else. I think the most important aspect in a relationship between a producer and a sales company is trust. Because any sales company can tell you they can sell the movie, and then once they've sold it, it's the follow-up, it's everything else that comes with it. They can promise you the moon, but sometimes they don't quite deliver that. And I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the ugly can get really ugly if a film gets sold and it doesn't sell everywhere, and all of a sudden the sales company needs to use the deposits for bills, instead of the movie, or it happens all the time, unfortunately, because they want to survive. Right, so it's a survival instinct. The most common ones is not having, all the money. They think they can start a movie with 50% of the funding, because they think, oh, we raised 50%, let's start the movie, and then they don't find themselves with the rest of the money. That's one of the problems that happens a lot. I think it's, if you have an actor in mind and you can wait 6 or 8 months, it's best for the movie and best for you to do that, because ultimately it's the movie that you want. Otherwise, you start compromising in the beginning, you'll find that you compromise all along. I mean, often, sales companies are sort of in the, they're in the trenches. They speak to the distributor, so they know what's going to work in territories. So it's important for producers to hear that feedback, because if the producer thinks that going with an unknown is better for the movie just because that's what his passion is, but it's not going to sell the movie, that's going to hurt distribution, and so you have to listen to what the distributor wants, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to buy the movie and distribute your movie.